This episode of MoneyWeek Talks is brought to you by Lion Trust. Lion Trust is an investment manager that believes in the power of being actively different.
Vail, the market cap is about $2 billion US dollar. It is listed on the London Stock Exchange and is a member of the FTSE 250
so it's
index.
a mid-cap, essentially.
Yeah. And it has performed very well, actually. So if you look at its returns since 2000, the fund returns around 12% per annum. So that's a compounded annual growth.
Hello, I'm Andrew Van Sickle, Editor-in-Chief of MoneyWeek. Welcome to another episode of MoneyWeek Talks. MoneyWeek's motto is make it, keep it, spend it. In each episode, we help you do just that with guests whose insight and perspectives you can profit from. In this episode, I'm very lucky to be joined by Thuy-Anh Nguyen. Thuy-Anh is the product specialist at the Vietnam Enterprise Investment Limited, or VAIL, an investment trust that's been active in the country for 30 years now. It's the oldest fund in the market dedicated to profiting from the extraordinary growth of Vietnam, one of the most exciting emerging markets in the world. Vietnam's development has been a highly personal journey for Thuy-Anh too, as she was born and brought up there. Welcome, Thuy-Anh. It's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you so much for joining me in the studio.
Thank you very much for having me, Andrew.
Now, MoneyWeek is like Vietnam since 2005, when we refer to it as Asia's other communist dynamo. Now, these days it's actually growing much faster than China. Rather like in China, the government at one stage decided to set the market free. But before that, life was extremely difficult. You were a young child in the late 70s and 80s. So what was it like growing up at that stage?
Yeah, so, Vietnam, after many years of war, the American war in Vietnam finally ended in 1975. And Vietnam came out of it being one of the poorest nations on earth. So, yes, I was a young child growing up in the late 70s and 80s. Food was bought with rationing stamps. And there was often not enough of it. Sometimes the shops would run out of even rice, which is the staple food that goes on people's meal 3 times a day. And, meat and eggs, protein products are scarce. Actually, we live on the side of a lake, and now when we reminisce about the olden days, my father sometimes boasts how his skillful catching of the fish really helped supplement our meals and help bring up myself and my brother. So it was tough because the economy was operating under it's a centrally planned economy, but during the 80s, sometimes Vietnam even had to import rice to feed its citizens, and by the late 80s, the government realized that this is not working, and that was when they initiated these massive reforms called Đổi mới, which just means rejuvenation, where they moved from centrally planned economy to a free market economy, i.e. they allow the free enterprises to form and for people, for entrepreneurs to put their creativity to work. So,
what year did they sort of pull the trigger on this process?
So that was in 1986, and it really started Vietnam on a path of the Vietnam economic growth miracle started then, and because of that, in my lifetime, I've been so lucky to witness the transformation of Vietnam as a country. When I was growing up, for example, on the street there were only bicycles, and maybe the odd Lada cars from imported from the Soviet Union, right? But by the time I was in high school, most people have a motorbike. And now if you go to Vietnam, the streets are teeming with cars and some motorbikes as well. And
so now you've got SUVs knocking people off the bikes.
There are even the latest SUV models and the top car brands from the world, but also EVs adoptions are high there as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So when they pulled the starting gun on this, did they do it like China style in a certain area first, or was it pretty much across the board that collectivism and all the inefficiencies of collectivism were swept aside and they just let people get on with it?
Yes, it's sweeping reforms across the board. It's from politics to economics to and also most importantly opening up the country for trading with the rest of the world. And that it wasn't until 1994 that the United States lifted its embargo on Vietnam.
Yes. Okay.
And that helped our export journey.
When everything got going, did Vietnam sort of consciously decide that it would try to emphasize exports, a bit like much of the region? Was the idea to try and not just reach out to the world but become a specialist in certain exports? Is that broadly how it happened? With
Yes, exactly. So just like all the other Asian tigers, it's we realize that the way to earn income is to export what we can to the rest of the world. So it started with because Vietnam is a very resource-rich country with abundant labor. So in the beginning, it was all about exploiting the cheapness, the cost effectiveness of our labor force compared to the rest of the world. So the products that we exported in the beginning was more agriculture and very light manufacturing, so garments and textile. And then in the 2000s, it's more to do with frozen seafood, so shrimp and fish became a major product for exports. And
coffee is quite big.
Coffee as well, yeah, coffee and rice. So from a net importer of rice, now we produce enough for our citizens, but also to export. Vietnam is one of the biggest rice exporter. And then everything got turbocharged when we joined the World Trade Organization, WTO, in 2007.
The story of development often, and I think Vietnam is no exception in this particular case, is that one starts with manufacturing exports, one starts with the commodities one has, and then gradually you sort of become an exporter of higher value things. One moves up the value chain.
Yeah.
But that's broadly happened, hasn't it? We have now, I think there's some stats about Samsung doing a lot of production in Vietnam.
Yes.
Is that broadly what's been going on?
Yes, exactly. So volume of exports have been increasing, but not just that. The value of exports as well. We've been moving, climbing up the value chain. So in terms of textile, for example, it used to be cheap, unbranded stuff. Now in Vietnam, we manufacture for global brands like Nike, Lululemon, Adidas, higher value stuff. And most importantly, the biggest component of exports now is electronics and machinery. And together they account for more than 40% of total exports from Vietnam. And you're right to mention Samsung. They have been cumulatively the biggest foreign direct investor in Korea has been the biggest FDI investor in Vietnam. And Samsung produce 50% of their handsets in Vietnam and export to the rest of the world. Vietnam also has a lot of Apple suppliers. Many of them have diversified their supply chain from China into Vietnam in recent years.
Oh, okay. What percentage of GDP is exports now? Is it really sort of guessing quite a whopping high one still?
Yeah, I mean, the total value of export is around 100% of GDP, but import is also very high.
Because for GDP stats, one takes the imports away. So
So exactly. So the net export minus import is about 20 billion, and that's about that's slightly less than 5% of GDP.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's
a net earning from so export minus import.
Okay. Now, in the GDP equation, of course, there's also consumption. And coming back to the development model, what often happens is you've got, exports get going, a gradual level of wealth is reached. The exports catch the eye of international companies. I think FDI is really big now, isn't it? And that has started a vicious a virtuous circle
yeah.
with consumption. Is that
Yes.
that's broadly?
Yeah, absolutely. So, during all these couple of decades that Vietnam has been a manufacturing powerhouse and export powerhouse, FDI have been flowing in, attracted by friendly government, friendly business operating environment, and also very cheap and ever-expanding labor force, right? Because Vietnam is a country with a very populous country with 100 million people.
And fairly young people also.
And
right?
very
So
young,
you've got
yeah.
a labour force, yeah.
Exactly. So the average age is 32. And we have this thing called the golden population structure, where for every dependent in society, you have two people in the working age group of between 15 and 65 supporting them. So foreign companies are attracted by this strong labor force. They've been coming in. And meanwhile, the people who work for this in the factories or somewhere in the supply chain, or even Vietnamese who have set up companies to export or to support this FDI situation, they have been accumulating wealth, and the middle class has been forming and rising, and this population is not just a labor force anymore. It's also a force for consumption.
And increasingly conspicuous consumption.
Increasingly conspicuous, yes. Yeah, in Vietnam now you can find the top brands, the top global brands. There's in Ho Chi Minh City, we have a street called Dong Khơi Street. There you can find brands from, MS, Tiffany, Dior, everything, but also local brands. So because it's the consumption of the bigger middle class that's important for GDP.
I would imagine this is still focused very much on the big cities like Ho Chi Minh. That's the financial center, is it?
Yes. So Ho Chi Minh is the financial and commercial center of Vietnam. The administrative capital is Hanoi, that is in the north. So Ho Chi Minh Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi are the two biggest, basically tier one cities in Vietnam.
And the most buzzing with new businesses, presumably.
Yes, exactly. So each city have about 10 million people and expanding fast still. They are quite different actually, because in Ho Chi Minh City, people are more kind of outgoing. You would find restaurant and bars opening a bit later into the night than Hanoi.
Has it always been the case that the South has been a little bit more?
Yes, yeah, somehow it has.
Gung-ho.
Exactly, it has worked out that way. So even for people, my friends from Hanoi, for example, many of them...
That's where you grew up, right?
Yes,
Hanoi,
I grew up in Hanoi, yeah. So many of my friends, when they have new ideas and want to start a business, many of them actually go to Saigon to start it rather than in Hanoi. People in Saigon are wealthy, and they like to spend it. So that's quite good for the economy, right? And for entrepreneurs. Hanoi people, the concentration of wealth there might be even higher, but it's more kind of, it's quieter, it's the mentality is more towards kind of saving rather than too much outward spending.
Oh, okay.
So it's an interesting dynamic between the two cities.
Division in a way,
Yeah.
Regional. Oh, okay. Were you conscious growing up that, your parents, did they take the northern approach of being a bit more cautious?
I mean, in my days...
Warning you not to go and buy an SUV once the time came.
Yeah, in my days it wasn't hard because there was no money to spend anyway. So all of this I only realized afterwards, because in my days traveling wasn't even that easy. Now I think there's a flight every hour going from Hanoi to Saigon and vice versa during the day. But in my days, I think we didn't really get to travel a lot. I think the annual holiday is maybe 3 days by the seaside, which is about 100 kilometers away, but it'll take 5 hours to get there, kind of thing. So things have moved on immensely since then.
Gosh, yeah, like a history on fast forward, huh?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, let's come back a little bit to exports, because we have this whole drama with essentially the liberal internationalist trading order fracturing. The US has imposed tariffs, or rather imposed tariffs as a way of getting a deal going. How has all this affected Vietnam, which is, of course, highly export sensitive? Will you talk us through what's been going on, how essentially they reached a deal with the US administration,
Absolutely.
and what, whether it's not as bad as it could have been, or that kind of thing? What is the consensus?
So allow me to step back and go to the first Trump presidency. So Vietnam was really a big beneficiary of that, because under the first Trump presidency, he dialed up tensions against China. In fact, started a sort of a trade war, right? And that really accelerated this process called China Plus One, where multinational companies they had realized a few years before that the global supply chain is way too dependent on China, and that process had already started, but then it got really turbocharged under Trump because of the trade tension. And many of these companies diversified their supply chain into Vietnam, because Vietnam our northern border is share with China, and the northern industrial hub of Vietnam is only 100 kilometers away from the southern industrial hub of China.
Oh, okay.
So for companies to relocate to Vietnam, or at least put new factories in Vietnam, or diversify a bit of it into Vietnam, is very easy, logistically easy, and also labor cost in Vietnam is still only the manufacturing, the work of wages, still only about 50% that of China.
Oh, okay.
Plus, it's a friendly government, and so Vietnam has became more and more important in U.S. China containment strategy. The U.S. quite like part of especially the technology supply chain to be in Vietnam, because it can count on Vietnam as a kind of a friendly country and a counterbalance to China influence in the region. So over the first Trump presidency, Vietnam FDI into Vietnam increased exponentially every year.
Yeah, so the first time round wasn't too bad at all. In fact, if anything, perhaps a bit of a net gain for Vietnam, given the way the supply chains moved.
Exactly, it's a big gain, and we were so successful with that by the time President Trump came to power in the second term, we looked set to become a victim of our own success, right? Because by then we were running a trade surplus against the US.
Which he noticed.
Yeah, he did. So in 2024, Vietnam's trade surplus against the US was 120 billion US dollar, which is why on that Liberation Day, Vietnam was number 3 on that. Do you remember that board where he had
all the countries in trouble?
All the countries. So we were number 3, and President Trump announced that he was going to slap a 46% tariff on goods coming from Vietnam into the US. So then it was quite a shock actually for Vietnam, but the government actually took a very constructive approach. They immediately went to the negotiating table. In fact, I think our General Secretary To Lam, he was on the phone to Trump the very next day, and he got through, and they had a conversation. Anyway, so negotiation started straight away, and then Vietnam became the second country in the world, only after Great Britain actually, to announce a trade deal with the US. That was announced in July, and the tariff now was reduced from 46% to 20%, which for us is a good result, because at that level, Vietnam is still very competitive compared to others. So other nations in Southeast Asia also get around 20% tariff. I think China and India are still up to 50%, isn't it? So Vietnam's the competitiveness is still intact.
Okay, so that actually was more or less a happy ending.
Yes, quite.
Okay, before we look at how that beds into the economy, let's just
Yeah.
digress quickly because it's relevant here. What is the foreign policy of Vietnam? Has it always tried to be, equidistant from China and America? Has that changed? Has the emphasis changed in recent years, or is this very much a long-term, leitmotif that they will try to be equidistant?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So Vietnam practices this strategy called bamboo diplomacy. So, bamboo is a plant native to our country, and it's very strongly rooted. So you can have, but the branches are very flexible and it can bend with the wind. Bamboo is very, very strong. In fact, in Hong Kong, all the scaffolding are made of bamboo, even for skyscraper. There's anyway. So
it bends, but it won't break.
Exactly. So that's the idea. And coming out of so many years of war, Vietnam is very mindful that we just want peace and we want to improve people's standards of living. That's what the government is focused on, and it's not interested in taking side in any international dispute. So yes, the idea is to keep friendly with all different nations, especially with the superpowers. We have to balance their influence, and we don't want to fall in any camps.
Okay.
Neutral.
Okay. So
and
that
friendly.
Studiously neutral. Okay. Nice to everyone. Okay, that's fine. Now, to recap, we've got the export story, we've got the consumption story, the tariff drama wasn't as bad as all that. Where are we now in terms of the outlook? We have I think a GDP target. The government quite likes its target still of about 8%. Is it?
Yes. Yeah. So
and we've heard that there's been another drive
yes.
recently to get it up to 8%.
Oh
is that
my
right?
God! Yes, there's so much to talk about there, right? Like you mentioned, so the tariff, for example, when all the drama was happening, and we were thinking, oh my God, so much tariff. What are we going to do? It forced Vietnam. It forced the government, the businesses, policymakers to take a long, hard look at the economy and how it's operating. And, we realized that, like I mentioned earlier, the export minus import, the contribution, is actually less than 5% of GDP. And in terms of the number of people that the export sector employ, it's only 8% of the labor force. And in terms of the equity market is actually not exposed to not exposed so much to exports. So because most of the exports are done by foreign direct investment companies, so like Samsung that we mentioned earlier, or like Apple suppliers, they are not listed on the equity markets, right? So in fact, in the whole of the Vietnam index, only 1.5% of corporate revenues is directly linked to US exports. So,
so actually the stock market now, we can drill into that a bit later as well, but just to sort of keep orientation now. So essentially that's become more of an internal story, a services and consumption story.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, and then also what we touched on earlier is that the middle class has been expanding and wealth accumulation has been happening, right? So, but even before all this tariff drama, the government, this administration has been in power since August 2024. And since the beginning of 2025, they have announced, they have embarked on a sweeping program of reform that's being called Đổi mới 2.0. So earlier we talked about Đổi mới 1.0 in 1986 that set the country on this growth trajectory that we were achieving average 6.5% GDP growth per annum. And now the reforms now happening for almost 40 years from the first wave of reform is also so sweeping in nature that it's being called Đổi mới 2.0. And what's happening here is that the government is, first of all, since the beginning of the year, embarked on a big efficiency drive. So they've merged a number of provinces from 64 to 33, and they've merged the number of ministries from 19 to 15. So really cutting out a lot of bureaucracy. And they also reduced their own workforce, the civil servants, by 20%. So really increasing efficiency across the board. And the biggest initiative that they have done is to pass a resolution 68, that say now to put the private sector at the forefront, at the center of economic development going forward. So you're right, the GDP target was 8%. Actually, then the economy has done so well that I think about halfway or 3/4 through the year, the government say, no, the target for this year is 8.5% now and not 8% anymore. From next year onwards, it's the target is double-digit growth, so aiming for 10% next year.
Okay. Given that, of course, civil servants don't like being sacked, and is there evidence that there are certain interest groups that are quite strong within the system, and will they resist this kind of change? Are there lobby groups that are trying to undermine it, do you think?
So this is always the difficulty for this kind of reforms, right? But in the case of this government, actually this is for the first time in a while now that we see the level of unity, and everybody seemed to be standing behind all of these reforms. In fact, everything that I have mentioned, it's already happened. It's not a plan. It's, they announced it end of 2024. They started action in beginning of 2025.
Okay, so
now they've achieved all of
those
this.
20% civil servants are gone.
Yes,
and they'll have to love it or shove it.
Yeah, well, it's not too brutal, because I guess there were a lot of slack in the system that need to be cut. So people were encouraged to retire a bit earlier, and the merging of the provinces and the merging of ministry already creates very easy ways to
some easy wins.
cut.
Yeah.
Yes, and also the government has been quite good in putting aside quite what I understand is the package for people who retire are quite decent. So not too much complaints.
Oh, okay. So no ructions yet.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it strikes me that I suppose if you've got an efficiency drive, I would imagine that the entire population, if not the civil servants, is very much behind it. So I don't suppose there's too many.
Yes, exactly.
Too much resistance.
Yeah, especially the business communities, very much buying into this vision of the government, and that has spurred more confidence in consumption, as well as investment activities by the corporates.
Okay, no, that's good. Okay, let's go and drill into the stock market a bit more now. You've said that's broadly a consumption story. It's worth noting here that it's had a huge success in terms of recognition, because it's become not simply a frontier market, but an emerging market, right?
Oh, yes. That's a big development this year. So in October, FTSE Russell announced that that Vietnam has been reclassified to emerging market, and that will take effect from September 2026. That is another example of how this government means business, because Vietnam has been on the watch list of FTSE Russell for an EM upgrade since 2018. There's some technical things that needed to be sorted out, but never got sorted out.
It's just much easier now for foreign investors to come and buy it.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So the government put everybody to work, right? The SBV, the State Security Commission. So the fact that we got upgraded now is a good example of how this government means business, and it can push through things that has been stuck.
So essentially, I mean, the upgrades, we should just probably make clear for listeners that if you are deemed by this index provider an emerging market rather than a frontier market, you should be able to get much more money into the market because certain trackers will be able to hold you.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
the idea, right?
Yeah.
That's one thing. The other thing is that over the years, what we've read about Vietnam is that the stock market isn't terribly big, but it's getting there. One thing one did read about over the years, and it's worth addressing here briefly, is that there were rules about quotas, how much of a company foreigners may hold. Has that changed somewhat? Is that more relaxed now? And is that something that was also a box tick for an index provider?
Yeah, so the foreign ownership limit is something that we still need to work on, and that is crucial for the next things that the stock market need to achieve, which is an upgrade by MSCI.
Yeah.
So FTSE Russell is important, and like you said earlier, it will allow a lot more capital. It will attract more capital into the country. So we estimate that with FTSE Russell upgrade, between 1 to 1.5 billion inflow will happen just on the passive index, and between 5 to 7 billion of inflow will happen on the active funds.
Okay. And just for context, how much is the overall market cap?
The overall market cap of all the companies in Vietnam is 260 billion.
Oh, okay. So this is certainly going to move the needle, I would have thought.
Yes, it's very decent amount. But that pales in significance compared to an MSCI upgrade.
Okay, because so that other index provider is a wee bit more important.
Exactly. Yeah. It's watched by a lot more investors. And given how things are happening so fast, I wouldn't be surprised if it get upgraded before 2030. But you mentioned foreign ownership limit, and that is one of the things that will need to be solved.
Is it now 49% or something? Essentially, they don't want to give control of the companies to other investors.
Exactly, especially in important industries like banking, for example, or telecom. So there's of course, it's important to not have foreign ownership of industries that are important for national securities. But for example, in retailing, you don't need to have such an ownership.
This always makes me think of France, where they insist that yogurt is strategically important and cannot be owned by foreigners. So it's all a delicate path. Let's quickly now look at your fund in particular and tell us a story about how this has been going on for 30 years. When was it set up, and who set it up?
Yes, so Vietnam Enterprise Investment Limited was set up in 1995. It's managed by Dragon Capital, and Dragon Capital was founded by an Englishman, actually, Dominic Scriven, OBE. He has been awarded an OBE by the British Queen. So Dominic came to Vietnam in 1992. Great timing, because that was when the country started opening up and allowing free enterprise and all of that. He clearly saw the potential.
Was he backpacking, and was he traveling generally and then decided to stay?
Actually, I think he was already a broker. He started his career with M&G, the big asset manager here in the UK. And then he worked a bit in Hong Kong, and then he went to Vietnam. I think he wanted to learn a tonal language and chose Vietnamese to learn. Actually, now he has been living in the country ever since then, and he is very fluent in Vietnamese. Very impressive, actually. So anyway, so he set up Dragon Capital in 94, and then in 95, Vail was born, and to this day, it's still the flagship fund of Dragon Capital. So Vail, the market cap is about $2 billion US. It it is listed on the London Stock Exchange and is a member of the FTSE 250
So it's
index.
a mid-cap, essentially.
Yeah. And it has performed very well, actually. So if you look at its returns since 2000, the fund returns around 12% per annum. So that's a compounded annual growth. 12% may not sound too exciting, especially in an emerging market context, but over 25 years, year in, year out, that's a really good performance. In fact, I believe that outperformed even your other favorite asset class, gold, right? And S&P as well. And FTSE definitely outperformed. It outperformed S&P. Yeah, and year to date, VALE is the best performing Vietnam trust on the London Stock Exchange.
Okay, and so just to recap, it takes a big picture approach, and equities only, right? There's some funds that will start dabbling in private equity and property, but you guys basically concentrate on equities.
Yeah. So we concentrate only on listed equity. In Vietnam now, 1,600 companies are listed. We concentrate on about 150 stocks, but that's just to show you that the universe of investable
is pretty big.
Is pretty big. And so VALE has over 40 stocks in its portfolio, and its aim is to provide long-term capital growth by provide a broad-based exposure to this economic story of Vietnam.
Well, that brings us quite neatly to your biggest sector holding, because banks are usually a good way to tap into an overall growth story.
We like banks because it's the most effective way to tap into the growth of the economy. So banks account for about 40% of the Vietnam index, but so 40% in weight, but in earnings, it contributes 60% of earnings to the Vietnam index. In the VALE portfolio, banks account for 37% of the portfolio. And why are banks so important in Vietnam? It's because bank loans are almost the entire capital markets in Vietnam, because corporate bonds market is very much in its infancy.
Okay, so essentially the only lenders in town are the banks.
The banks, because the total size of the corporate bonds is only equivalent to about 10% of GDP. In this country, I believe it's about 100% or more in England. And the equity capital market is also, we mentioned earlier that that total market cap is 260 billion, but the free floats of the big companies are still quite low. So bank loans provide the lifeblood of the economy, i.e. the credit, yes, the capital for corporates. That's why banks are important, right? And banks stand to benefit from the growth of the economy because it's serve the middle class, which is a major driving force of the economy. Digitalization also means that processes are getting, the costs are getting cut all the time, so leading to better profitability. And also banks finance a lot of the property sectors.
The
right?
digitalization in banks, you mean?
Yeah, in bank, and also digital adoption by citizens as well. So everything,
Okay, so they have their finger in pretty much every pie. We like to ask sometimes about the top holdings. Now, I noticed that 2 of the top 3 are Vinhomes and Vingroup, and these are real estate stocks. Give us a quick overview of what's going on in real estate. Is this really one of your favorite areas now? Because it wasn't always in the top, was it?
Yes, exactly. You're right. So Vinhome has always been considered to be the best property developer in Vietnam because their execution is excellent. Their land bank is very good, and property sector overall has been recovering really well this year, which really helped our performance actually, because we have been positioning for this since the end of last year. Vin Group is actually the the company of Vin Homes. It's a conglomerate. It has Vin Homes, it has Vincom Retail, it has Vin Pearl, which is a kind of a resort operator. But last year there was, and for a couple of last year there was an overhang on the Vin Group because it also has a EV manufacturer called VinFast, which is loss-making, and is still loss-making now. However, sentiments have really turned in Vin Group favor since start of this year because of the government's agenda. Actually, we've been talking a lot about the reforms that the government has been working on, and one big part of that is to drive this economic growth. They want to do much bigger infrastructure investment. So in pushing private sector, like we mentioned earlier, they really want to focus on having some national champions, and Vin Group is identified as one of those possible
so national builder,
national champions. Yeah, Vin Group formed this company called VinSpeed. That is, they are bidding for the construction of the North-South high-speed railway, which is a major infrastructure project that National Assembly have already approved, and that should start next year. And that's a very ambitious project worth around.
When is it supposed to finish?
Well, it was going to. So when they first announced the plan, it was going to take 10 years. So finishing in 2035, right? Yeah, 2035. But since Vin Group have thrown their hat into the ring for the bidding, they've been saying 5 years.
Okay.
And there's another corporate.
It does rather put HS2 to shame, doesn't it?
Yeah, so that's a big project. It's worth about $70 billion.
Okay, I just want to finish off with one stock that looks like it's an interesting element, really. I suppose the key element of the consumer, story that we have here, and that's Mobile World. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yes, Mobile World
It's your second favorite stock now, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So Mobile World has been in Vail's portfolio since forever. It's such a great company. They dominate the retailing market. So it started as a retailer of consumer electronics, and they really. They have a very distinctive yellow logo. You can see them on every single high street, not just in the first tier cities, but also second, third tier city. They really master the retailing model, and have been very profitable. And then a few years ago, they applied this retailing expertise from the electronics product into grocery. And in that, they tap into this urbanization trend and the formation of the middle class. Spending habits are changing. People don't have the time to go to wet market every day to buy food anymore, which is what I used to do when I was growing up, right? We go every day, we buy what we need for that day, fresh, and that's it.
So now this has become more of a convenience proposition.
Exactly. Okay. So now people want to shop in convenient, modern, air-conditioned stores, and people, young families living in cities, they don't have time. So Mobile World, they set up this chain called Backward Sang that set up these convenience stores everywhere. Tapping into this changing consumer habit and urbanization.
Seems like a great way to keep your finger on the pulse of development, really.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we better leave it there. I think we're running out of time. So I'd like to thank you very much, Thuy-Anh, for coming in and telling us all about this exciting story. It's still very much one of our favorite markets.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so very much, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching or listening, and I will see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.